My brother pulled into our mother's driveway, revving a brand new $170,000 matte black Porsche. He claimed it was a reward for a massive promotion. Considering he had been unemployed for 6 months, I knew it was a lie. What I did not know was that he had shattered my grandfather's display case and sold his priceless antique violin to fund this little shopping spree. When I stood by my grandfather's hospital bed later that day and told him what his golden grandson had done, my grandfather did not yell. His eyes just turned ice cold. He picked up his phone, dialed his lawyer, and whispered, "Let us see how they handle this." My name is Renee, and I am 35 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with entitled family members who think your boundaries do not apply to them. The roar of a sports car engine shattered the quiet peace of Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the patio of my mother Brenda's house, sipping a glass of iced tea, when the noise forced me to look up. A matte black Porsche 911, aggressive and obnoxiously loud, turned sharply into the driveway. The driver revved the engine twice before killing the ignition. The passenger door opened first and my sister-in-law Simone stepped out. She was draped in a brand new designer silk blouse and holding a luxury handbag that I knew cost more than my first car. Then the driver's side door opened and my younger brother Andre stepped out grinning from ear to ear. My mother Brenda rushed past me, knocking my chair in the process. She threw her arms open wide and squealed with delight. "Oh my goodness, look at you both!" she shouted, running down the driveway to embrace her golden boy. Andre leaned against the hood of the car, looking incredibly smug. "Renee, come down here and look at your brothers." "New car," my mother demanded, waving me over. I slowly set my glass down and walked down the steps. I did not smile. I am a classical string appraiser and a music therapist. I have built a successful career by paying attention to the smallest details, and the details in front of me made absolutely no sense. "Andre, you have been unemployed since January," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It is August. How exactly did you finance a $170,000 vehicle?" My mother immediately shot me a lethal glare. "Why must you always ruin a beautiful moment, Renee?" she snapped. "Your brother just landed a massive executive promotion. He is celebrating. We are a family that supports each other. You should be toasting to his success instead of interrogating him." Supporting each other was my mother's favorite phrase. Translated, it meant that I was expected to open my wallet whenever Andre messed up. I remembered when I was 25, and my mother literally forced me to co-sign Andre's student loans by threatening to kick me out of the house. I ended up quietly paying off those loans myself to save my own credit score, while Andre dropped out of college to pursue a failed music career. I had spent years being the family bank and the family scapegoat. But those days were over. I looked closely at Andre. Despite his smug smile, a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. When I asked him which company hired him, he refused to make eye contact. He vaguely muttered something about a private tech startup and quickly changed the subject to point out the custom leather seats to our mother. Simone was busy taking selfies in front of the hood, completely ignoring the tension. My gut told me something was terribly wrong. Andre did not have the credit score to buy a used bicycle, let alone a luxury sports car. I turned away from the driveway and walked back into the house. I did not go back to the patio. Instead, I quietly walked up the carpeted stairs to the second floor. I was heading straight for Grandpa Elijah's study. Grandpa was 82 years old and currently recovering from a severe bout of pneumonia in the VIP wing of the city hospital. He was a retired jazz and classical musician, but he was also a man who quietly built a fortune in commercial real estate. The rest of the family thought he just lived on a modest pension. Only I knew the truth, and only I knew about the 1920s Italian violin he kept locked inside a custom climate-controlled display case in his study. He had explicitly promised that violin to me for my upcoming gallery exhibition. I reached the end of the hallway and turned the brass knob of the study door. It was unlocked. That was my first red flag. Grandpa Elijah never left that door unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The heavy curtains were drawn, but the afternoon light caught the glimmer of broken glass on the Persian rug. I stopped breathing for a second. The custom glass display case had been completely shattered. The velvet lining inside was bare. The violin was gone. I stood there staring at the empty case. I did not scream. I did not cry. A cold wave of pure clarity washed over me. I turned around, walked out of the study, and marched right back down the stairs. I stepped out the front door and walked straight down the driveway. Andre was just tossing the car keys to Simone so she could feel the weight of them. "Andre, where did you get the money?" I asked. My voice was so dangerously calm that even my mother stopped smiling. Andre puffed out his chest. "I told you I got a promotion. Stop being so jealous just because I am moving up in the world." I took a step closer to him. "You did not get a promotion, Andre. You sold Grandpa Elijah's violin." The silence that fell over the driveway was deafening. Simone stopped posing for her phone. My mother gasped and put her hand over her chest. Andre swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously, but he quickly recovered his arrogant smirk. "So what if I did?" Andre scoffed, crossing his arms. "It is just a dusty old fiddle. Grandpa is in the hospital. He is barely holding on. He does not need it anymore. Simone and I needed a reliable family car. We are planning for our future. I found a private broker online who gave me $170,000 cash for it. It was a fair trade." I looked at my mother, expecting her to be horrified. Instead, she stepped between me and my brother. "Renee, calm down," she pleaded. "Your brother needed a win. You have a stable job and a nice apartment. You do not understand the pressure he is under to provide for his wife. It is just wood and strings. Grandpa has plenty of old junk in that house. It is not the end of the world." I stared at the woman who raised me, realizing she would justify absolutely anything her golden boy did. I did not argue. I did not try to explain that the violin was a registered international antiquity worth vastly more than a car. I just smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that made Andre take a physical step back. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and snapped a clear photo of the temporary license plate on the back of the Porsche. "What are you doing?" Simone demanded, her voice shrill. I looked right at my brother. "You just sold stolen property, Andre. Enjoy the ride while it lasts." I turned on my heel, walked straight to my own car, and got in. My mother was screaming my name from the driveway, telling me to come back and apologize. I ignored her and started my engine. I did not drive to the police station. I drove straight to the hospital. It was time Grandpa Elijah knew exactly what his grandson was up to. The drive to the hospital took exactly 22 minutes, but my mind was moving light years ahead. I did not shed a single tear. I did not punch the steering wheel. I just calculated. My brother had always been reckless, and my mother had always been his shield. But this was not a broken window or a stolen $20 bill from my purse. This was a felony. When I pulled into the parking garage of the city medical center, I took a deep breath. I walked through the sliding glass doors and headed straight for the elevators, taking them up to the VIP recovery wing. Grandpa Elijah was in room 412. The nurses' station knew me well by now, and they waved me through. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, the room was quiet, except for the steady, rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine. Grandpa was sitting up in bed. Physically, the pneumonia had taken a toll on him. His frame was thin, and his skin looked fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights. But the moment he turned his head and looked at me, I saw the exact same fire in his dark eyes that he had possessed his entire life. He was 82 years old, and his mind was sharper than a surgical scalpel. "You are here early, baby girl," he said, his voice raspy but steady. "You usually do not visit until after dinner." I walked over to the chair beside his bed and sat down. I did not believe in sugarcoating things for him. He had always respected me because I treated him like an equal, not a fragile old man. "Grandpa," I said, leaning forward, Andre broke into your study this afternoon. He shattered the climate-controlled case. The 1920 Italian violin is gone. Grandpa Elijah did not gasp. His heart monitor did not spike. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Keep talking, he commanded softly. I kept my voice clinical and detached. Andre drove up to the house in a brand new matte black Porsche 911. He bragged to the whole family that he got a promotion, but when I pushed him, he admitted he found a private broker online. He sold the violin for $170,000 cash to buy the car and fund a shopping spree for his wife Simone. Mom is throwing him a celebration right now. She said I was being selfish for caring about wood and strings. A heavy silence fell over the hospital room. My mother and my brother had spent their entire lives underestimating Grandpa Elijah. They thought he was just a retired jazz musician surviving on a modest city pension and Social Security. They thought the sprawling house he lived in was just a lucky investment from the 70s. They had absolutely no idea that over the last 40 years, Grandpa had quietly built an empire in commercial real estate and private antiquities. He hid his wealth on purpose. He knew that if my mother ever found out about his true net worth, she would drain every single cent to fund Andre's endless string of failed business ventures and Simone's luxury lifestyle. I was the only one who knew the truth. When I was a teenager, instead of going to the mall, I spent my weekends in his study, learning how to appraise classical strings, reading property deeds, and understanding the value of quiet wealth. Grandpa Elijah slowly reached up and adjusted his oxygen tube. The look on his face was not heartbreak. It was absolute bone-chilling fury. He did not raise his voice. He did not curse. He simply looked at me and said, "Hand me my phone." I reached into the drawer of his bedside table, pulled out his cell phone, and placed it in his hand. He unlocked the screen and pressed a single speed dial number. I sat back and watched a masterclass in execution. "Thomas, it is Elijah," he said into the receiver. Thomas was his longtime attorney and financial fixer. He was a man who moved mountains with a single piece of paper. "Listen to me very carefully, Thomas. My grandson Andre just pawned the 1920 Italian violin. Yes, the one from the master collection. He sold it to a private broker for $170,000. I need you to initiate protocol right now." Grandpa paused, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. A grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Exactly. Call the bank. Trigger the federal fraud hold. Then call our friends at the bureau. Let us see how they handle this." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the blanket. He looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze made me sit up straighter. "My mother and my brother are fools, Renee," he said quietly. "They think selling an antique is like selling a used couch on the internet. That violin was not just an old instrument. It is a registered international antiquity recognized by the Global Appraisal Board." I nodded slowly, realizing exactly what Andre had done. "It is federally documented," I said, "which means it cannot be legally transferred without the original certificate of authenticity." Grandpa Elijah smiled a thin, cold smile. "Precisely. And that certificate has been locked in a safe deposit box at my bank for 15 years. For Andre to get a broker to wire him $170,000, he did not just sell stolen property. He had to forge my signature on federal transfer documents. He committed wire fraud across state lines. He committed grand larceny. And he left a paper trail a mile wide. The sheer scale of Andre's stupidity hung in the air. He had traded 10 years in federal prison for a sports car he could not even afford to insure. And my mother was currently at home pouring champagne to celebrate his hustle. "Go home," Renee Grandpa said, leaning back against his pillows. "Get your paperwork in order. The storm is going to hit in about 10 minutes, and they are going to come looking for you when it does. Do not give them an inch." "I promise I will not," I said, standing up. I kissed his forehead. He patted my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. I turned and walked out of the room, feeling a profound sense of justice settling into my bones. I walked down the quiet hospital corridor and pressed the button for the elevator. The silver doors slid open and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. I watched the floor numbers tick down. 7, 6, 5. Just as the elevator reached the third floor, my cell phone began to vibrate violently in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a call from my mother. I let it ring for a few seconds, savoring the moment before I finally swiped to answer. I did not even get a chance to say hello. Renee, my mother, shrieked into the phone. Her voice was pure, raw hysteria. The confident, smug tone from the driveway was completely gone. "Where are you? What did you do?" I stepped out of the elevator and walked into the bustling hospital lobby. "I did not do anything, Mom," I said, keeping my voice light and breezy. "I am just running some errands. How is the celebration going?" It is ruined," she sobbed. "Andre just went to buy premium gas for the Porsche and his debit card declined. He logged into his banking app and his entire account is locked. It says frozen for federal fraud investigation. He is having a panic attack at the gas station Renee, and Simone is trapped inside a designer boutique downtown. She tried to buy $2,000 worth of shoes and the store manager confiscated her credit card. They told her the account was flagged for grand larceny. Fix this right now. You must have called the police out of spite." I pushed open the glass doors and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the city sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. "I cannot fix a federal fraud hold, Mom," I said calmly, unlocking my car. "Andre forged a federal document to sell a registered antiquity. He committed a felony." "You are lying," she screamed. "He is your brother. You are trying to destroy your own blood because you are jealous. You get over to my house right now and give him the money from your savings account to clear this up, or I swear to you, Renee, I will make you regret it. We are coming to your apartment and you are going to write him a check." I smiled as I slid into the driver's seat. "Come on over, Mom," I said. "I will be waiting." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The game had officially changed. They thought they could intimidate me into fixing their mess just like they always did. But they were about to walk right into a trap they could never escape. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking garage, and drove toward my apartment, ready for the war to arrive at my front door. I reached into the drawer of the metal bedside table and pulled out his phone. It was a simple black device, but in his hands it was a weapon. I placed it in his palm, watching his long fingers grip the edges. Grandpa Elijah did not hesitate. He did not look for a contact name. He dialed a number from memory, a number I knew belonged to Thomas, his attorney and closest confidant for over 30 years. The room was completely silent except for the rhythmic hissing of the oxygen machine. Grandpa held the phone to his ear. When Thomas answered, Grandpa did not bother with greetings. "Thomas, it is." "Elijah," he said. His voice was raspy from the pneumonia, but the absolute authority in his tone made the air in the room feel heavy. "Listen to me very carefully. My grandson Andre just took the 1920 Italian violin from the study. Yes, the master collection piece. He sold it to a private broker for $170,000, cash to buy a car. I need you to initiate the security protocol right now." I sat perfectly still in the vinyl hospital chair, listening to the calculated precision of my grandfather's words. He paused, listening to whatever Thomas was saying on the other end. A sharp, humorless smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Exactly," Grandpa replied. "Call the bank holding my estate accounts. Trigger the federal fraud hold on the transaction. Then contact our friends at the Federal Bureau. I want the serial numbers flagged internationally. Let us see how they handle this." He ended the call and tossed the phone onto the crisp white hospital blanket. He let out a slow breath, closing his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at me. The intensity in his dark eyes was paralyzing. "My mother and my brother are absolute fools, Renee," he said quietly. "They think selling an antique is like selling a used television on the internet. They see an old wooden instrument and think it is just a trinket collecting dust." He shifted against his pillows, pointing a shaking finger toward me. "That violin was not just a piece of wood. It is a registered international antiquity recognized by the Global Appraisal Board. I bought it in London 40 years ago, and its provenance is tracked by federal authorities." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as the reality of the situation fully materialized in my mind. So it cannot be legally transferred without the original certificate of authenticity, I stated. Precisely, Grandpa said. And that certificate has been locked inside a titanium safe deposit box at my primary bank since before you were born. For Andre to get a private broker to wire him $170,000, he did not just sell stolen property. He had to forge my signature on federal transfer documents. He committed wire fraud across state lines. He committed grand larceny. And knowing your brother, he left a paper trail a mile wide. The sheer magnitude of Andre's stupidity hung in the air. My younger brother had traded decades of his life in federal prison for a flashy sports car he could not even afford to put gas in. And my mother was currently at home pouring expensive champagne, throwing a party to celebrate his brilliant hustle. Grandpa Elijah let out a dry cough, and I quickly handed him a cup of water. He took a sip and fixed his gaze on me again. "Go home, Renee," he commanded softly. "Get your paperwork in order, and lock your doors. The storm is going to hit our family in about 10 minutes, and they are going to come looking for you when the lightning strikes. Do not give them a single inch. Do not write them a check. Let the consequences crush them. I promise I will not," I said, standing up and smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I leaned over the bed and kissed his warm forehead. He patted my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man his age. I turned and walked out of the hospital room, feeling a profound sense of justice settling deep into my bones. I walked down the quiet hospital corridor, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished linoleum floor. I pressed the silver button for the elevator and waited. The doors slid open and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the main lobby. I watched the digital numbers tick down, counting the floors as I descended. 7, 6, 5. Just as the elevator reached the third floor, my cell phone began to vibrate violently in my purse. I pulled it out and glanced at the bright screen. It was a call from my mother, Brenda. I let it ring for a few seconds, savoring the sweet anticipation of the moment before I finally swiped the screen to answer. I did not even get a chance to say hello. Renee, my mother, shrieked into the phone. Her voice was pure, raw hysteria, so loud that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. The confident, smug tone she had used on the patio just an hour ago was completely gone. "Where are you? What did you do?" I stepped out of the elevator and walked into the bustling hospital lobby, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I did not do anything, Mom," I said, keeping my voice light and breezy as I navigated through the crowd of visitors. "I am just running some errands. How is the big celebration going?" "It is ruined," she sobbed, panic choking her words. Andre just took the car to buy premium gas and his debit card declined at the pump. He logged into his mobile banking app and his entire account is locked. The screen says it is frozen for a federal fraud investigation. He is having a full-blown panic attack at the gas station Renee, and Simone is trapped inside a high-end designer boutique downtown. She tried to buy $3,000 worth of shoes and dresses, but the store manager confiscated her credit card. They told her the account was flagged for grand larceny. "Fix this right now. You must have called the police out of spite because you are jealous of your brother." I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the crisp evening air. The sun was just beginning to set, painting the city sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. "I cannot fix a federal fraud hold." "Mom," I said calmly, unlocking my car with my key fob. "Andre forged a federal document to sell a registered antiquity. He committed a serious felony." "You are lying," she screamed, her voice cracking. "He is your brother. You are trying to destroy your own blood. You get over to my house right now and transfer the money from your savings account to clear this up. If you do not fix this right now, Renee, I swear to you, I will make you regret it. We are coming to your apartment, and you are going to write him a check." I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile, as I slid into the driver's seat of my car. "Come on over, Mom," I said softly. "I will be waiting." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The game had officially changed. For 35 years, they thought they could intimidate me into cleaning up their toxic messes just like they always did. But they were about to walk right into a trap they could never escape. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking garage, and drove toward my apartment entirely ready for the war to arrive at my front door. I pulled into the secure underground parking garage of my apartment building and took my time parking. I did not rush. I took the private elevator up to my floor, letting the quiet hum of the machinery soothe my racing thoughts. My apartment was my sanctuary. It was a spacious modern loft with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, hardwood floors, and quiet elegance. It was everything my chaotic childhood home was not. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and leaned against the marble island. I knew I would not have to wait long. Exactly 22 minutes later, the aggressive pounding on my front door echoed through the quiet hallway. It was not a normal knock. It was the frantic, entitled hammering of someone who believed they owned the world and everyone in it. I set my glass down, walked over to the door, and unlocked the deadbolt. Before I could even turn the handle, the door was violently pushed open. My mother, Brenda, stormed into my apartment, her face flushed with rage. Andre followed right behind her. Despite the fact that his bank accounts were currently frozen by the federal government, he still had the audacity to look annoyed rather than terrified. He walked in with his shoulders squared, trying to project dominance in a space that did not belong to him. "How could you do this?" My mother screamed, her voice shrill enough to rattle the glass in the windows. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You could not stand to see your brother happy for one single day, could you? You just had to ruin it. You called the bank, you called the police, and made up some ridiculous lie about a stolen violin just to embarrass him." I closed the front door softly behind them. I did not raise my voice. I did not match her hysterical energy. "I did not call the police, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "I went to the hospital to check on Grandpa Elijah. When I told him his prized possession was missing, he is the one who called his lawyer and the bank. He triggered the fraud hold. You should be screaming at your son for stealing from a dying man, not at me for telling the truth." Andre scoffed loudly. He walked past me and dropped onto my expensive custom sofa, kicking his designer sneakers up onto my glass coffee table. "I am not a thief, Renee," he said, rolling his eyes like he was explaining basic math to a toddler. "Grandpa is 82 years old. He is pumped full of heavy painkillers and hooked up to an oxygen machine. His memory is completely shot." I crossed my arms and stared at him. "His memory is perfectly fine, Andre. He remembers exactly what that violin is worth, and he knows he never gave you permission to take it. Who cares what he remembers?" Andre shot back a smug, arrogant grin spreading across his face. "Who are the federal investigators going to believe? An old man who is practically delirious in a hospital bed, or his loving grandson? I will just tell the police that Grandpa gave me verbal permission to sell the instrument weeks ago to help me get back on my feet. It is my word against the word of a sick old man. And Mom will back me up. Will you not, Mom?" My mother did not even hesitate. "Of course I will," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I will tell the authorities that my father has been confused for months. I will tell them he promised that violin to Andre ages ago and just forgot. We will say he is not in his right mind. You are not going to send my son to prison over a piece of wood, Renee. We are family. We protect each other." The sheer magnitude of their delusion was almost fascinating to watch. They actually believed they could outsmart the federal government, the Global Antiquities Board, and a millionaire real estate mogul with a pathetic lie they cooked up on the ride over here. They thought the rules of the real world functioned like the rules inside our toxic household, where whoever screamed the loudest got their way. "You are going to commit perjury to cover up a felony?" I asked, staring at my mother. "You really think federal agents will just take your word for it when the certificate of authenticity is locked in a bank vault?" Before my mother could answer, the front door was thrown open again. Simone burst into the apartment. She looked like an absolute disaster. Her perfect blowout was ruined by the wind, her makeup was smudged, and she was breathing heavily. She had clearly been forced to take a rideshare across town after her credit cards were confiscated. She was carrying one single shopping bag from a cheap pharmacy, clutching it like a weapon. "This is your fault," Simone screamed, pointing directly at me the moment she crossed the threshold. She stomped into the living room, her heels clicking aggressively against my hardwood floor. I was humiliated, Renee. Humiliated. The manager at the boutique cut my credit card in half right in front of the entire store. They treated me like a common criminal. I had to ride in an economy cab with a driver who smelled like old cigarettes just to get here. "That sounds like a personal problem, Simone," I replied deadpan. "Maybe next time do not fund your shopping sprees with stolen goods." Simone let out a shriek of pure frustration. "I'm going to sue you for emotional distress," she yelled, taking a threatening step toward me. "You are a bitter, jealous woman. You knew exactly what you were doing. We needed those accounts unlocked today. Do you understand me?" "Today." Andre stood up from the couch, suddenly looking nervous. "Simone." "Calm down," he muttered, trying to grab her arm. "We will figure it out. Do not tell her everything. Tell me what I asked," raising an eyebrow. Simone shoved Andre's hand away, completely unhinged. "No, I will tell her," she snapped. "I want her to know exactly what she is ruining. We did not just buy the Porsche, Renee. We used the leftover money to secure our future. We wired the remaining $70,000 this afternoon as a non-refundable earnest money deposit on a luxury penthouse downtown." The room went dead silent. Even my mother looked surprised by this piece of information. I stared at Andre, putting the pieces together. The violin sold for $170,000 cash. A brand new Porsche 911 cost exactly that much. But if they only put down a massive payment on the car and financed the rest, they would have a chunk of cash left over. Cash they immediately threw at a penthouse they could never afford to maintain. If those funds do not clear the fraud hold by tomorrow morning. Simone continued, her voice shaking with rage. "We lose the entire deposit. We lose the penthouse. We lose everything because of your petty little phone call. You owe us that money, Renee. You are going to write us a check right now to cover the frozen funds until this investigation clears up." I looked at Simone, then at Andre, and finally at my mother. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They had stolen from our grandfather, committed multiple federal crimes, bought a luxury sports car, tried to buy a penthouse, and now they were standing in my living room, demanding that I empty my own bank accounts to save them from the consequences of their own spectacular stupidity. I stared at the three of them standing in my living room, demanding my money. I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, a sound bubbled up from deep inside my chest. I started to laugh. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of my apartment. Simone took a step back, her face twisting in confusion and anger. "Are you crazy?" Simone shrieked. "What is so funny?" I shook my head, wiping a tear of amusement from the corner of my eye. "You are funny, Simone. All three of you are hilarious. Let me make sure I understand this completely. You want me to write you a check for $70,000 to cover the deposit on a luxury penthouse. You want me to use my hard-earned money to replace the money my brother stole from our dying grandfather, just so you do not lose your earnest money. It is a temporary loan." Andre snapped, his face flushing with embarrassment. "As soon as I clear things up with the bank and the federal investigators, I will pay you back with interest. You have the money, Renee. I know your appraisal business is doing well. Stop acting like you are broke." "Oh, I am not broke, Andre," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "But I am also not stupid. You have never paid anyone back in your entire life. Why would you start now?" "That is not true," my mother interrupted, stepping forward to shield Andre exactly like she had done since we were children. "Your brother is good for it. He is a man of his word." I looked directly into my mother's eyes. "Really, Mom? Is he a man of his word? Like the time he promised to pay his student loans?" The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly heavy. My mother clamped her mouth shut and Andre looked away, staring at the hardwood floor. Simone looked back and forth between us, clearly missing a piece of the puzzle. "What student loans?" Simone asked, her voice losing a bit of its aggressive edge. I smiled, but there was zero warmth in it. "Oh, did Andre not tell you about that, Simone?" 10 years ago, when I was 25 years old and living in a tiny studio apartment, Mom showed up at my door. She told me that if I did not co-sign Andre's massive private student loans, I would be completely cut off from the family. I was young and terrified of losing my mother, so I signed the paperwork. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my brother. He dropped out of college 8 months later. He took the leftover loan money and bought a bunch of useless studio equipment trying to become a music producer. And then he defaulted on the loans. The bank came after me. "You did not have to pay them," Andre mumbled, still refusing to look at me. Mom was going to figure it out. Mom was not going to figure anything out. I fired back, my voice finally rising just enough to make him flinch. The collectors were calling my job Andre. They were threatening to garnish my wages. I spent 5 years eating ramen noodles, skipping vacations, and working 80-hour weeks to silently pay off $45,000 in debt that belonged to you. I sacrificed my 20s to protect my own credit score while you lived rent-free in Mom's house, sleeping until noon. Simone turned to Andre, her eyes wide. "You let her pay your loans?" she asked. "You told me you got a full athletic scholarship." Andre opened his mouth to defend himself, but my mother cut him off. "That is enough," Brenda shouted, clapping her hands together sharply. "That is ancient history, Renee. We are talking about today. Your brother is facing a crisis right now. He needs your help. Family helps family. He is facing a federal indictment, Mom," I said smoothly, "and I refuse to make myself an accessory after the fact to wire fraud. I will not give you a single dime, not for the car, not for the penthouse, not for a lawyer. You dug this hole all by yourselves and you are going to sit in it." Simone let out a frustrated scream. She threw her pharmacy bag onto my sofa. "You are a horrible, selfish person, Renee. We are going to be homeless if we lose that deposit. Where are we supposed to live while his accounts are frozen? We cannot afford the rent on our current place without the funds in his checking account. I suggest you start packing and move into Mom's basement," I said, pointing toward the front door, "because you are absolutely not staying here. Now get out of my apartment before I call building security." My mother did not move toward the door. Instead, her face hardened into a mask of pure vindictive spite. She slowly opened her expensive leather handbag and reached inside. "If you want to play hardball, Renee, we can play hardball," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She pulled out a folded piece of white paper and slammed it down onto the center of my glass coffee table. I glanced down at it. It was a standard typed document filled with legal jargon. "What is this?" I asked, crossing my arms. "It is a 30-day eviction notice," my mother said, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "But realistically, you have until Friday. You seem to have forgotten who actually runs this building, Renee. Grandpa Elijah gave me the management rights to this property 5 years ago. I am the landlord. I collect the rent. I make the rules." Andre suddenly smiled, his confidence returning in an instant. "That is right," he said, walking over to stand next to our mother. "Mom controls the leases. You just broke the golden rule of this family, Renee. You disrespected our mother. You want to act like a stranger, then you can live like one." My mother continued, stepping closer to me. "I let you rent this beautiful loft because you are my daughter. But if you are going to turn your back on your own brother in his hour of need, you can get out. Andre and Simone need a place to stay while this ridiculous bank misunderstanding gets sorted out. They are going to move into this apartment. It is the least you can do to make up for calling Grandpa and ruining their penthouse purchase." I stared at the piece of paper on the coffee table. It was clearly a generic eviction template she had downloaded from the internet and printed out. She had filled in my name and the apartment number with a blue ink pen. She genuinely believed that because Grandpa allowed her to act as the property manager, to give her a sense of purpose, she somehow held legal dominion over my life. So let me get this straight, I said, speaking slowly so they would hang on to every single word. Because I will not give you $70,000 to cover up a felony, you are throwing me out of my own home on 3 days' notice, so your golden boy can live here instead. That is exactly right, my mother said, crossing her arms defiantly. You have until Friday afternoon to pack your bags and hand over the keys. If you do not, I will have the super change the locks and throw your precious little antiques out onto the sidewalk. Simone smirked, crossing her arms as well. I want the apartment professionally cleaned before we move in, she added maliciously. I do not want to deal with your mess. I stood there looking at Simone's smug, malicious smile. I looked at Andre, who was already mentally measuring my living room for his new furniture. Then I looked at my mother, who was standing tall, believing she had finally backed me into a corner. I could not escape. They were completely convinced they had won. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice to argue. I simply turned around and walked away from them, heading straight for the small hallway that led to my home office. Where are you going? My mother called out, her voice dripping with triumphant satisfaction. Are you finally getting your checkbook? Make it out to Andre directly. We do not have time to wait for a bank transfer to clear. I ignored her. I walked into my quiet office and approached the heavy steel safe bolted into the corner of the room. I quickly punched in the 6-digit passcode. The heavy door clicked open with a solid mechanical thud. I bypassed the emergency cash and the velvet jewelry boxes. I reached into the back and pulled out a thick fireproof leather folder. I shut the safe, spun the dial to lock it, and walked right back into the living room. The three of them were standing around my coffee table waiting for their payday. I walked past them and stepped behind the large marble kitchen island. I dropped the heavy folder onto the stone surface. The loud smack made Andre jump slightly. What is that? Simone asked, craning her neck to look. That is not a checkbook. No, Simone, it is not a checkbook, I said calmly, unzipping the folder. I pulled out a stack of thick legal documents sealed with the official state notary stamps. I picked up the first document and slid it across the marble island toward my mother. This, Mom, is a master deed. It is the legal title to this entire apartment building. My mother rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exasperated sigh. I know what a deed is, Renee. I manage this building. I have the copies in my filing cabinet at home. You are just wasting our time. Stop stalling and write the check. You should read the name of the registered owner, Mom, I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the cool marble. Because it does not say Grandpa Elijah's name anymore. And it certainly does not say yours. My mother frowned, stepping closer to the island. She picked up the heavy document. Her eyes scanned the first page. She blinked once, then twice. I watched in absolute satisfaction as all the color drained from her face. Her hands started to tremble so violently that the thick paper shook, making a quiet rustling sound in the silent room. What does it say? Mom Andre asked, his arrogant smirk finally faltering. He reached over and pulled the document from her hands. His eyes widened as he read the bold print at the top of the page. 3 years ago, Grandpa Elijah realized his health was beginning to decline. I said, my voice echoing clearly in the room. He also realized that if he left his commercial properties in your hands, Mom, you would mortgage them into bankruptcy to fund Andre's ridiculous lifestyle. So he made a choice. He legally transferred the ownership of this entire apartment building to a private, limited liability company, an LLC that I am the sole owner of. That is impossible, my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. She grabbed the edge of the kitchen counter as if her legs were about to give out. I collect the rent. I handle the maintenance. I am the landlord. You are a glorified secretary, Mom, I corrected her sharply. Grandpa let you keep collecting the rent and calling the plumbers because he knew you needed a sense of control. He paid you a management fee to keep you busy so you would not ask questions about the rest of his estate. But you do not own a single brick of this building, I do. You have been working for me for 3 years and you did not even know it. Simone looked like she was going to pass out. She grabbed Andre's arm, digging her nails into his jacket. Wait, she stammered. If she owns the building, then the eviction notice you just gave her is fake. It is completely worthless. I finished for her. I walked around the island, picked up the generic piece of paper my mother had printed out, and tore it neatly down the middle. I dropped the pieces into the trash can, but we are not finished yet. I walked back to the folder and pulled out a second master deed. I slapped it down onto the island right next to the first one. While we are on the subject of real estate, Mom, you might want to look at this one too. My mother stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. She did not reach for it. She just stood there paralyzed. So I read it for her. "This is the deed to your house," I said, my tone ice cold. "The sprawling colonial with the manicured lawn and the heated pool, the house you just hosted a celebration in. Grandpa Elijah transferred that property to my holding company too." "No," my mother gasped, taking a step back and clutching her chest. Her eyes were wide with pure terror. "No, that is my home. I raised you in that house. It belongs to me." "It belonged to Grandpa," I said. "And now it belongs to me. You have essentially been a tenant living rent-free in my property, and I have been a very generous landlord. Until today." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a sleek silver pen. I took 2 blank legal forms from the back of my folder and placed them on the counter. I quickly filled out the dates and signed my name at the bottom of both pages. I slid the first paper toward my mother and the second paper toward my brother. "What is this?" Andre asked, his voice cracking with genuine panic. He did not touch the paper. He just stared at it like it was a death sentence. "That is a legal 30-day notice to vacate," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "Since you want to play games with eviction notices, let us play by the actual rules. I am officially terminating your tenancy, Mom. And Andre, since you and Simone currently live in the basement of that house, you are being evicted too. You have exactly 30 days to pack your things and get out of my properties. You cannot do this to us." My mother screamed, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Where are we supposed to go? We do not have any money. Andre's accounts are frozen. You should have thought about that before you defended a thief and tried to throw me out onto the street," I replied. They were completely frozen. The reality of impending homelessness crashed down on them all at once. The penthouse deposit was gone. The sports car was tied to a federal crime. The bank accounts were frozen solid. And now the roof over their heads had just been ripped away. The empire of lies and entitlement they had built their entire lives on was collapsing right in front of my kitchen island. "Now," I said, raising my hand and pointing directly toward the front door. "Get out of my apartment before I call building security and have you thrown out into the street." For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence in my apartment was absolute, broken only by the sound of my mother's jagged, heavy breathing. She stood frozen by the kitchen island, staring blankly at the spot where I had just laid out the legal documents proving I owned every roof over their heads. The empire of control she had built her entire life upon had just crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. Simone was the first to break the silence. The reality of losing her imaginary luxury lifestyle finally pierced through her delusion. She turned on Andre with a level of viciousness I had never seen from her before. "You need to fix this right now," she hissed, stepping into his personal space and hitting him hard in the chest with her cheap pharmacy bag. "You told me that violin was yours to sell. You told me we were rich." I already posted pictures of the penthouse floor plan on my social media pages, Andre. "All my friends think we are moving into a luxury high-rise downtown. Now we do not have a penthouse, we do not have an apartment, and your mother does not even own the house we live in. We are going to be homeless." Andre backed away from her, his eyes darting frantically around my living room. He was sweating profusely now, his designer silk shirt clinging to his back. The arrogant, smug golden boy persona he had worn since childhood had completely melted away. In its place was a terrified little boy who finally realized he could not hide behind our mother's skirt to escape the consequences of his own actions. "I will fix it," Andre stammered, holding his hands up in a desperate attempt to calm his hysterical wife. "It is just a misunderstanding with the bank. I will just take the car back." "That is it. That is the solution." I will drive the Porsche straight back to the dealership right now. He started pacing back and forth across my hardwood floor, constructing a ridiculous fantasy in real time. I have only had the car for a few hours, he muttered, running a hand over his face. I will tell the general manager that I changed my mind and I want to unwind the deal. They have to take it back. I will invoke the buyer's remorse clause. They will reverse the transaction, take the car back, and release the funds directly into my checking account. Then I will just call the private broker, buy the violin back, and return it to Grandpa's study before the federal agents even know what happened. I leaned against the marble counter and watched him talk himself into this impossible plan. It was almost tragic how little he understood about the real world and how the law actually worked. You cannot return a vehicle bought with stolen money. Andre, I pointed out, keeping my voice perfectly calm and detached. The transaction is already flagged by the bank for wire fraud. The dealership is not going to just hand you $170,000 in cash because you suddenly changed your mind. The moment you try to return that car, you are walking right into a trap. Watch me, he snapped, pulling the heavy luxury key fob from his pocket. He was completely manic now, operating on pure adrenaline and denial. They have a return policy, Renee. I am a paying customer. The manager shook my hand and told me I was part of their family now. They have to take it back. Come on, Simone. We are leaving right now. Simone did not argue. She shot me a look of pure, concentrated venom, turned on her heel, and followed my brother out the door. She was walking so fast that she stumbled over the threshold, nearly breaking the heel of her shoe. My mother did not follow them. She remained standing in my kitchen, looking down at the torn pieces of the fake eviction notice resting in my trash can. The fight had completely drained out of her. She slowly looked up at me, and for the first time in my 35 years of life, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Renee, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. Her expensive makeup was smudged from her tears, making her look much older than her 60 years. You have made your point. You are the smart one. You are the successful one. We respect you now. Just tear up those eviction notices. I am your mother. I sacrificed my body and my youth to raise you. How can you throw your own mother out onto the street? I crossed my arms and looked at her without a single ounce of sympathy. You do not respect me, Mom, I said softly. You only respect the fact that I currently hold the deed to your house. And do not talk to me about sacrifices. I sacrificed my credit score to pay off Andre's student loans because you forced me to. I sacrificed my peace of mind to be the family scapegoat while you worshipped a son who stole from a dying man. You are the one who walked into my home 10 minutes ago and tried to throw me out onto the street. I am simply giving you the exact same energy you gave me. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She reached out a trembling hand as if she wanted to touch my arm, but I took a deliberate step back. It is time for you to go, Mom, I said, pointing toward the hallway. You have 30 days to figure out your living situation. I suggest you start packing. A choked sob escaped her throat. She slowly turned around and walked toward the front door. Her shoulders were slumped and her head hung low. The terrifying, demanding matriarch of the family had been completely broken by her own hubris. She stepped out into the hallway without looking back. I walked over to the door, pushed it shut, and turned the heavy brass deadbolt until it clicked loudly into place. I leaned against the solid wood and let out a long, deep breath. The apartment was finally quiet again. The toxic, chaotic energy that had followed my family everywhere they went was entirely gone, leaving behind a profound sense of peace. I walked back over to the kitchen island and began organizing my legal documents. I neatly stacked the master deeds and slipped them back into the thick fireproof leather folder. Just as I zipped the folder shut, my cell phone vibrated violently against the marble counter. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. It was a text message from Thomas' grandpa, Elijah's attorney. The message was incredibly short, but it carried the weight of an oncoming hurricane. It read, "Meet me at my office in 30 minutes. The trap is set." I stared at the glowing screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. Andre thought he was going to drive back to the dealership and simply undo a federal felony with a smile and a buyer's remorse excuse. He had no idea that Grandpa Elijah had been playing chess while the rest of them were playing checkers. I walked into my bedroom and changed out of my casual clothes. I put on a sharp-tailored charcoal blazer and a pair of dark slacks. I wanted to look my absolute best for what was about to happen next. I grabbed my purse, picked up my car keys, and headed out the door. My family thought the worst part of their day was getting evicted from their homes. They were about to find out that the nightmare had not even truly begun. I drove across town with the windows rolled up and the radio completely off. The silence inside my car felt like a victory lap. For years, I had been the one cleaning up the messes, absorbing the screaming matches, and acting as the shock absorber for my family's endless dysfunction. But today, I was finally off the clock. I merged onto the interstate, heading straight for the financial district downtown. Thomas was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. His office was located on the 40th floor of a sleek glass skyscraper that overlooked the harbor. I parked in the visitor garage and took the express elevator up. When the silver doors slid open, I walked past the marble reception desk. The receptionist knew me well and simply nodded, pointing down the long hallway. I opened the heavy mahogany door to Thomas' private office. He was sitting behind a massive oak desk surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with legal volumes. Thomas was a 65-year-old man with silver hair, sharp eyes, and an impeccably tailored navy suit. He had been Grandpa Elijah's fiercest protector and closest confidant for over 3 decades. When I walked in, he did not smile. He simply gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Sit down, Renee," he said, closing the thick file he had been reading. "Your grandfather wanted me to brief you on the exact parameters of the situation before the authorities make their final move." I sat down and crossed my legs, resting my purse on the floor. "I assumed Grandpa called the bank and flagged the transaction for fraud," I said. "Andre was locked out of his accounts within an hour of selling the violin." Thomas let out a dry, raspy chuckle. "Flagging the bank account was just the final nail in the coffin, Renee. Your grandfather set this trap long before today. Did you really think an 82-year-old man with a multi-million-dollar antiquities collection would just leave a 1920 Italian violin sitting in a glass case without insurance and active market monitoring?" I frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean, market monitoring?" Thomas opened a sleek black folder on his desk and slid a glossy photograph toward me. It was a picture of the violin sitting on my grandfather's desk. "Your grandfather knew Andre was circling his estate like a vulture. He knew your brother was desperate for cash and lacked the moral compass to earn it legitimately. So 5 years ago, your grandfather registered the serial numbers of every valuable piece in his house with a private global tracking firm." Thomas leaned back in his leather chair, stapling his fingers together. "When Andre stole the violin this morning, he immediately went online to find a discreet buyer. He thought he was being a criminal mastermind by avoiding public auction houses. He logged into a high-end private collector forum and offered the instrument for a quick cash sale. But what Andre did not know is that the forum is heavily monitored by the very tracking firm your grandfather hired." My eyes widened as the sheer brilliance of the trap began to click into place. "So the private broker Andre found was not a broker at all," Thomas finished smoothly. "It was an undercover associate of your grandfather's. The moment Andre posted the photos, the associate contacted me. I took the phone into your grandfather's hospital room, and we gave the green light to proceed with the sting operation." I sat back in my chair, completely stunned. "You bought the violin back." "We did not buy it back," Thomas corrected, a sharp legal smile crossing his face. "We secured it as evidence. The associate wired the $170,000 directly into Andre's account. But because the funds were transferred across state lines for the purchase of stolen federal antiquities, it immediately triggered a felony wire fraud classification. Andre forged the certificate of authenticity, effectively handing the federal government a perfectly wrapped indictment. The violin was safely recovered hours ago and is currently sitting in a secure vault." I shook my head, letting out a breath of pure disbelief. Andre thinks he is going to drive back to the dealership and return the car, I said. He thinks he can just claim buyer's remorse, get the cash refunded, and buy the violin back before Grandpa notices. Thomas laughed out loud this time. It was a rich, booming sound that filled the large office. He thinks he is going to return the car. Oh, that is rich. That brings me to the second part of our meeting. He pulled another document from the black folder. This one was a vehicle history report and a commercial lending agreement. He pushed it across the oak desk. Read the highlighted section, Renee. I picked up the heavy paper. It detailed the title information for the exact matte black Porsche 911 Andre had purchased. I scanned down to the financing section. Dealerships rarely own their luxury inventory outright. They use commercial floor plan financing to buy the cars from the manufacturer. I looked at the name of the holding company that provided the financing for this specific luxury dealership. My breath caught in my throat. I read the name of the LLC twice, just to make sure I was not hallucinating. This is Grandpa's commercial holding company, I whispered, looking up at Thomas. Exactly. Thomas said, his eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. Your grandfather is the primary private financier for that entire luxury auto group. He holds the lien on every single piece of high-end inventory on their lot. Which means Andre used stolen money from your grandfather to buy a car that is technically legally owned by your grandfather. The absolute poetry of the situation was staggering. Andre had trapped himself in a perfect, inescapable circle of financial and legal ruin. He was driving a stolen car bought with stolen money, all orchestrated by the man he thought he was outsmarting, because the purchase funds were flagged for federal wire fraud. Thomas continued. The dealership management software automatically locked the title. The general manager was notified 20 minutes ago that the transaction is void and the vehicle is now classified as evidence of grand larceny. They are not going to give him a refund, Renee. They are going to detain him. Right on cue, my cell phone began to ring inside my purse. The loud digital chime cut through the quiet elegance of the law office. I reached in and pulled it out. The caller ID flashed my brother's name. Speak of the devil, I muttered, showing the screen to Thomas. Answer it, Thomas said, gesturing toward the phone. Put it on speaker. Let us hear how his return policy strategy is working out. I swiped the screen and tapped the speaker icon, placing the phone flat on the oak desk. Andre, I said, my voice perfectly calm. Did you get your refund yet? Renee? His voice crackled through the speaker. He was hyperventilating, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The background noise was chaotic. I could hear people shouting and the loud mechanical beep of a commercial tow truck backing up. Andre, what is going on? I asked, leaning closer to the phone. They will not take it back, he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror. I brought the keys to the general manager and told him I wanted to cancel the deal. But he would not even let me into his office. He told me the title is locked. He said the bank flagged the wire transfer as fraudulent and the car is legally considered stolen goods. I know, Andre, I said smoothly. What do you mean you know? He yelled. Renee, you have to come down here right now. Simone left me. She called a cab and took off. The manager called the police. They have security guards standing by the exit doors. They will not let me leave the showroom. You have to bring your credit card. You have to pay them for the car so they will let me go. I looked at Thomas, who was quietly packing his briefcase with a look of absolute steel on his face. I am not coming down there to buy you a Porsche, Andre, I said, picking up the phone and taking it off speaker. I told you that the transaction was a felony, but there is one detail you do not know yet. What detail? He begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whimper. Please, Renee. I am scared. You should be, I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. The dealership cannot take the car back because the title has a commercial lien on it. The private holding company that finances that dealership's inventory belongs to Grandpa Elijah. You used his stolen money to buy a car from his own company. You walked right into his trap. There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the exact moment Andres' arrogant heart completely shattered. The realization that he had been played, that he was never the smartest person in the room, finally crushed him. The police just pulled into the parking lot, Andre whispered. Do not resist arrest, Andre, I said softly. It will only add more time to your sentence. I ended the call and dropped the phone back into my purse. The trap had sprung, the jaws had snapped shut. I stood up from the leather chair and smoothed the front of my blazer. I looked at Thomas, who was waiting by the mahogany door. Are you ready to go watch the show? He asked, holding the door open for me. I would not miss it for the world, I replied. I walked out of Thomas' office feeling lighter than I had in years. The heavy burden of being the family shock absorber was finally gone. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, got into my car, and merged onto the busy downtown streets. The drive to the luxury auto group took less than 15 minutes, but every single second felt like a victory lap. I was not rushing to save my brother. I was driving to witness the exact moment his towering ego completely collapsed under the weight of his own terrible choices. The dealership was a massive architectural masterpiece made almost entirely of floor-to-ceiling glass. It looked like a museum for European sports cars. Even from the street, I could see the chaos unfolding inside. I pulled my car into the visitor parking lot and turned off the engine. Right next to the VIP delivery lane, a heavy commercial tow truck with flashing yellow lights was slowly backing up. The operator was already jumping out of the cab, unspooling thick metal chains, and walking straight toward the matte black Porsche. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the showroom and stepped inside. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Several wealthy customers were standing near the customer lounge, holding their complimentary coffees and openly staring. A few people had even pulled out their cell phones to record the spectacle. Andre was standing right in the center of the pristine white showroom floor. His face was flushed dark red, and his designer silk shirt was completely soaked in sweat. He was screaming at a tall, imposing man, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit, who was clearly the general manager. "You cannot do this to me!" Andre yelled, waving his arms frantically. "I am a paying customer. You shook my hand this morning. You gave me the keys. You cannot just take the car back because of a banking glitch." The general manager stood perfectly still, holding a leather clipboard. He did not raise his voice, but his tone was laced with absolute authority. "You are not a customer, sir. You are a massive liability. The wire transfer you initiated was flagged by the Federal Reserve for cross-state wire fraud. Our holding company placed an immediate lock on the title. As of this moment, that vehicle is classified as stolen property, and we are legally obligated to secure it before it leaves this lot." "It is not stolen!" Andre shrieked, his voice cracking in panic. "I have the money. Just let me call my bank. Just give me 10 minutes to clear this up." "There is nothing to clear up," the manager replied coldly. "The federal authorities have already frozen the transaction. The tow truck is taking the vehicle to an impound lot until the investigation is complete. Now I suggest you lower your voice and leave my showroom before I have security physically remove you." I stood near the reception desk, quietly watching my brother unravel. He turned around to look out the massive glass windows just in time to see the tow truck operator hook the heavy steel chains to the undercarriage of his beloved sports car. The hydraulic lift whined loudly as the front wheels of the $170,000 vehicle were hoisted into the air. Suddenly, the side doors of the showroom burst open. Simone stomped into the room. When Andre called me from Thomas' office, he thought she had taken a cab and left him, but she was still here. Her face was streaked with running mascara, and her expression was absolutely murderous. She was staring at her phone screen, furiously tapping the glass. "My rideshare account is completely suspended!" Simone shrieked, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "Every single credit card linked to my phone is declining. I cannot even get a cheap cab to take me home." Andre rushed over to her, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Simone, please just wait inside. I will fix this. I will call my mother. She will send us an Uber. Fix this." Simone snapped, slapping his hands away with incredible force. You are a broke loser, Andre. You lied to me. You told me you were a successful investor. You told me we were rich and that we were moving into a luxury penthouse. Instead, you dragged me into a federal crime. The manager at the boutique humiliated me. My friends are going to see this all over social media. Simone, please. Andre begged, tears actually welling up in his eyes. We are family. We have to stick together. I am not your family anymore, Simone screamed, throwing her cheap pharmacy bag directly at his chest. I am done. Do you hear me? I am filing for divorce the absolute second I can find a lawyer who will work for free. I want nothing to do with you or your insane mother. She turned on her heel and stormed toward the front exit. She walked right past me without even registering that I was standing there. She pushed through the glass doors and marched out into the parking lot, leaving Andre completely alone in the middle of the showroom. I slowly walked further into the room, my heels clicking softly against the polished tile floor. Andre watched his wife walk away. His shoulders slumped in total defeat. Then he turned his head and saw me. Renee, he gasped. His eyes widened, and he practically ran over to me, grabbing my arm. Renee, thank God you are here. Tell them. Tell the manager that Grandpa gave me the money. Write them a check. You have to save me. They are taking the car. I looked down at his hand gripping my blazer. I did not pull away immediately. I just stared at him with complete indifference. I told you on the phone, Andre. There is no saving you. You stole from the wrong man. You thought Grandpa was just a sick old man you could easily exploit. You did not realize he has spent his entire life building an empire and protecting it from parasites like you. Please, Renee. Andre sobbed, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. I will do whatever you want. I will get a job. I will pay you back. Just fix it. Just as I opened my mouth to reply, the heavy glass doors of the showroom slid open again. 3 uniformed police officers walked inside, accompanied by 2 serious-looking men wearing plainclothes suits and federal badges clipped to their belts. The entire showroom went dead silent. Even the wealthy customers stopped whispering. Andre Williams, one of the federal agents, called out, his voice cutting through the thick tension in the room like a knife. Andre froze. He slowly turned around, his face draining of all color until he looked completely pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent commanded, stepping forward and unhooking a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for felony wire fraud and grand larceny. Andre did not fight back. He simply turned around and let the officer pull his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place echoed loudly in the quiet showroom. It was the sound of my brother's entire life coming to an abrupt and permanent halt. As the officers began reading him his rights, a familiar car screeched recklessly into the dealership parking lot. It parked diagonally across 2 handicapped spaces. The driver door flew open, and my mother Brenda sprinted out. She ran through the glass doors completely out of breath, her eyes wild with panic. No, stop, my mother screamed, lunging toward the officers. That is my son. He made a mistake. It is just a misunderstanding. Unhand him right now. Mom stepped back immediately. One of the uniformed officers warned, holding his hand up to block her path. Interfere with a federal arrest and you will be placed in cuffs as well. My mother dropped to her knees right there on the polished showroom floor. She began weeping uncontrollably, begging the officers to let her golden boy go. When the officers ignored her and began walking Andre toward the exit, she turned her head and saw me standing quietly nearby. She scrambled over to me on her knees and grabbed the hem of my jacket. Renee, please, she begged, looking up at me with sheer terror in her eyes. You are his sister. Tell them to stop. Drop the charges. I will do whatever you want. I will sign the building over to you. I will move out of the house. Just do not let them take my baby to prison. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. The woman who had demanded I sacrifice my own future to protect my brother time and time again. I gently but firmly pulled my jacket out of her desperate grip. I took a step back, putting distance between us. "I did not press charges, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady and loud enough for the entire showroom to hear. "The federal government did, and they do not care about your tears." I turned my back on my mother and walked out of the dealership. The automatic glass doors slid shut behind me, instantly cutting off the sound of her hysterical sobbing. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove home. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. For the first time in my life, the heavy, crushing burden of being the family shock absorber was entirely gone. The next 7 days were an absolute masterclass in watching karma collect its debts. The federal authorities moved with terrifying speed. Andre was formally indicted for wire fraud and the transportation of stolen goods across state lines. Because the crime involved a registered international antiquity, his bail was set at a staggering $250,000. My mother had to drain every single cent of her retirement savings and sell all of her expensive jewelry just to secure a high-risk bail bondsman to get him out of lockup. Simone, true to her word, did not even wait for him to get released. She filed for divorce on Tuesday, packed her designer bags, and moved back in with her parents. She even gave an exclusive interview to a local gossip blog, claiming she was the innocent victim of a manipulative con artist. My mother tried to call me dozens of times that week, alternating between screaming voicemails and sobbing apologies. I blocked her number. Meanwhile, the clock on their eviction notice continued to tick down. They had exactly 3 weeks to pack up their entire lives and vacate my properties. On the 7th day, my phone rang with a direct call from Thomas. "Renee, you need to come to the city hospital right now," he said, his voice uncharacteristically heavy and somber. "Elijah took a turn for the worse last night. His lungs are failing rapidly. He wants the entire family in the room for one final meeting." I drove to the medical center, my chest tight with a complex mix of anticipatory grief and profound respect for the man who had protected me when no one else would. When I walked into room 412, the air was incredibly thick with tension. Grandpa Elijah looked frail, his breathing labored and incredibly shallow. The heart monitors beeped with a slow, erratic rhythm. Thomas stood quietly in the corner, clutching a heavy black leather briefcase. On the opposite side of the room stood my mother and my brother. Andre looked like a completely different person. The arrogant swagger, the expensive designer clothes, the smug smirk, they were all entirely gone. He was wearing a wrinkled suit that looked 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. He was trembling visibly, staring blankly at the floor. My mother looked like she had aged 15 years in a single week. Deep, dark circles hung under her eyes, and her posture was completely defeated. As soon as I walked through the door, my mother shot me a look of pure venom, but she did not dare cause a scene in front of Thomas. Instead, she focused her desperate attention on the frail man lying in the hospital bed. "Dad," she whispered, creeping closer to the edge of the mattress. "Dad, please, you have to listen to me. You have to fix this. Andre made a terrible mistake. He is just a boy, a 32-year-old boy facing federal prison," I thought to myself, but I kept my mouth shut. I walked over to the opposite side of the bed and gently held my grandfather's hand. "The federal prosecutors are threatening him with up to 10 years in prison," my mother sobbed, reaching out to touch the crisp white hospital blanket. "10 years, Dad. His life will be completely over. You are his grandfather. You cannot let the government do this to your own blood. All you have to do is sign a piece of paper. Thomas is right here. He can draw it up right now. Just sign a retroactive permission slip. Tell the authorities you gave him the violin as a gift, and you just forgot because of your heavy medication. It is just a piece of wood. Please, Dad, save your grandson." Grandpa Elijah slowly opened his dark eyes. The physical weakness of his failing body was undeniable, but the sheer force of his spirit remained absolutely unbroken. He looked at my mother and then shifted his intense gaze to Andre. There was no pity in his eyes. There was only absolute, crushing disappointment. You raised a thief, Brenda. He rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper, but carrying the heavy weight of thunder. You raised an entitled, arrogant thief, and you enabled every single one of his catastrophic failures. You let him steal from me. You tried to throw Renee out onto the street to cover up his tracks and protect his fragile ego. I was just trying to protect my family. My mother cried, tears streaming down her face. Renee is your family, Grandpa shot back, his chest heaving with the immense effort of speaking. And you sacrificed her over and over again for a boy who would not cross the street to save you. I am not signing anything. Andre will face the federal judge, and he will serve every single day of the sentence he earned. Andre let out a pathetic, whimpering sound and sank heavily into one of the vinyl guest chairs, burying his face in his trembling hands. He finally understood that there was no magical bailout coming. His grandfather was not going to commit federal perjury to save him. Grandpa Elijah turned his head toward the corner of the room. Thomas. He breathed out, exhausted. It is time. Let us finish this. Thomas stepped forward, placing the black leather briefcase onto the foot of the hospital bed. He clicked the heavy brass locks open and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. As your father's legal counsel and the executor of his estate, Thomas began, his voice projecting clearly across the quiet room. I am officially reading the finalized codicils to Elijah's last will and testament. These structural changes were legally executed and notarized prior to his current medical decline. What changes? My mother demanded, wiping her nose with a crumpled tissue. He already gave Renee the real estate. What else is there left to change? Thomas adjusted his silver glasses, looking down at the paperwork. First, regarding Andre, due to the attempted theft and forgery involving federal estate assets, an automatic disinheritance clause has been triggered. Andre, you are permanently and irrevocably removed from this will. You will receive absolutely nothing from the estate. No cash, no trusts, no heirlooms. You are legally and entirely severed from this family fortune. My brother did not even look up. He just continued to cry softly into his hands. Furthermore, Thomas continued, turning his sharp gaze directly toward my mother, Brenda. Your portion of the inheritance has been entirely restructured. You have proven yourself utterly incapable of managing finances or enforcing healthy boundaries. Therefore, your share of the liquid assets will not be given to you directly. It has been placed into a strict, irrevocable trust. You will receive a modest stipend of $1,500 a month for your basic groceries and living expenses. However, this stipend is entirely conditional. You will only receive it if you attend mandatory financial counseling and maintain a modest residence that you pay for yourself. And most importantly, Thomas paused, letting the massive weight of his next words fill the room. The sole trustee and manager of this trust, with absolute discretionary power over your monthly payouts, is your daughter Renee. The room went dead silent. My mother stopped crying instantly. She slowly turned her head and looked at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The woman who had spent 35 years treating me like a second-class citizen was now completely financially dependent on my approval for the rest of her life. I ended the call and dropped the phone back into my purse. The silence in Thomas' office was deeply satisfying. Thomas looked at me across his mahogany desk and raised an eyebrow. He did not need to ask the question out loud. We both knew I had to see this with my own eyes. I thanked him for his time, walked out of the heavy wooden doors, and took the express elevator down to the parking garage. I merged onto the busy downtown streets, heading straight for the luxury auto group. The afternoon traffic was heavy, but I did not mind. I rolled the windows down slightly, letting the cool city breeze fill the car. For my entire adult life, my nervous system had been hijacked by my family's constant emergencies. I was always the one speeding across town to pay a late bill, smooth over an argument, or write a check to save my brother from ruin. But today my heart rate was perfectly steady. For the first time, I was not arriving to save Andre from a disaster. I was arriving to watch him finally face one. The dealership was an intimidating structure of steel and floor-to-ceiling glass, designed to make customers feel like they were entering a modern art museum rather than a car lot. I pulled into the visitor parking area, finding a spot near the back edge of the property. Even from the outside, I could see the chaos unfolding through the transparent walls. I pushed through the heavy double doors. The pristine quiet of the luxury showroom, usually filled with soft classical music and polite murmurs, was instantly shattered by the sound of my brother's voice. Andre was standing in the exact center of the room, surrounded by gleaming European sports cars. He was waving his arms frantically, his face flushed a deep, angry red. His new designer silk shirt was completely soaked with sweat, clinging uncomfortably to his back. "This is a mistake," Andre yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the general manager. "You are making a massive mistake. I brought the car back. I am handing you the keys right now. You have to reverse the transaction. It is the law. I have buyer's remorse." The general manager was a tall, impeccably groomed man who looked like he had dealt with every type of entitled behavior on the planet. He did not flinch. He did not lower his voice to spare Andre's feelings. Instead, he spoke with the clear, projecting tone of a man who wanted everyone in the room to understand exactly what was happening. "Sir, there is no transaction to reverse," the manager stated firmly. "The wire transfer you initiated this morning was flagged by the Federal Reserve for cross-state wire fraud. Because of your actions, our commercial holding company placed an immediate lock on the title. The funds you transferred are entirely frozen. Our own dealership accounts associated with this sale are temporarily frozen. You did not just buy a car with bad credit, you brought stolen money into my business." I walked further into the showroom, stopping near a display of leather upholstery samples. I kept my distance, blending in with the crowd. The room was packed with wealthy clients holding their complimentary espresso cups, staring openly at the spectacle. A few people were even whispering to each other, shaking their heads. Andre looked around, noticing the audience, and his aggressive panic began to morph into desperate humiliation. "It is not stolen money!" Andre shrieked, his voice cracking under the pressure. "It is my grandfather's money. I am his heir. It is just a family dispute, not a federal crime. Just call my bank, I can prove it. Give me 10 minutes and I will have my mother down here to vouch for me. She will clear this all up." The general manager crossed his arms, looking at Andre with absolute disgust. "Your mother cannot vouch for a federal felony, sir. As of 20 minutes ago, this dealership was instructed by the authorities that the vehicle in question is no longer consumer property. It is legally classified as evidence of grand larceny." Andre stumbled back a step, as if he had been physically struck in the chest. "Evidence," he repeated the word, barely making it past his trembling lips. "No, you cannot do this. I am a paying customer. You shook my hand this morning. You poured me champagne. I shook the hand of a man I thought was a legitimate buyer," the manager corrected sharply. "Not a man who forged a federal certificate of authenticity to fence stolen antiquities. Now I am going to ask you to stop yelling in my showroom before I have security physically restrain you." I stood perfectly still, watching the arrogant golden boy persona completely shatter into a million pieces. Andre had spent his entire life believing that the rules of the real world did not apply to him because my mother always provided an excuse or a financial bailout. He genuinely believed that a confident smile, a lie, and a little bit of smooth talking could erase a federal crime. He was finally colliding with the harsh, unforgiving reality of the law, and the impact was entirely devastating to witness. Suddenly, the deep mechanical rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine vibrated through the glass walls of the showroom. Several customers turned to look out the front windows. I turned my head as well. Backing slowly into the VIP delivery lane, directly in front of the main entrance, was a massive commercial tow truck. Its bright yellow lights flashed in a rhythmic pattern, reflecting off the pristine glass panes. Andre froze. He slowly turned around, following everyone else's gaze. Outside, the tow truck operator jumped down from the cab wearing a high-visibility vest and thick work gloves. He walked straight to the back of his truck and began unspooling heavy steel chains. "No," Andre gasped. He ran to the glass, pressing his hands flat against the window. "No, stop him. That is my car. You cannot take it. Please tell him to stop." The general manager did not even look outside. "The vehicle is being impounded by the authorities, sir. It will remain in a secure federal lot until your trial concludes." Andre watched in absolute horror as the operator crawled under the front bumper of the $170,000 matte black Porsche. The heavy chains clinked loudly against the metal, a sound that pierced right through the thick glass of the showroom and echoed in the quiet room. The hydraulic lift engaged, whining loudly as the front wheels of Andre's ultimate status symbol were hoisted off the pavement. He had sold our grandfather's legacy, betrayed his family, and risked a decade in federal prison, all for a car he got to drive for exactly 3 hours. The tow truck shifted into drive and began pulling the Porsche out of the dealership lot. Andre pressed his forehead against the cool glass, leaving a smudge of sweat on the window as he watched his entire future get dragged away down the street. As the heavy hydraulic lift of the tow truck whined and the yellow lights faded down the busy avenue, the heavy silence inside the luxury showroom was abruptly broken. It was not the sound of my brother crying or the general manager giving another order. It was the sound of a sharp, bitter laugh. I turned my head and watched Simone step out from the shadows near the customer lounge. She had been standing there the entire time, watching the absolute destruction of her imaginary high society life. The public humiliation she suffered at the designer boutique downtown when her credit cards were confiscated had already pushed her to the edge. But watching the $170,000 sports car get dragged away by a commercial repo truck was the final devastating blow. The delusion that she was married to a successful, wealthy investor completely evaporated, leaving only the horrifying reality that she was legally tied to a broke federal criminal. Andre turned to her, his eyes wide and desperate. He held his hands out as if he wanted to hug her. "Simone, baby," he stammered, his voice trembling. "Do not look at me like that. I am going to fix this. I will call my mother right now. She will hire a lawyer and we will get the money back. We are going to be fine." Simone stopped walking. She stood a few feet away from him, clutching her cheap pharmacy bag so tightly her knuckles were completely white. "Fix this," she repeated, her voice starting out as a dangerous whisper before quickly escalating into a piercing scream. "You are going to fix this by calling your mother. You are 32 years old, Andre, and your first instinct when you commit a federal felony is to call your mommy to come wipe your nose." Several customers in the showroom, who had started to politely look away, suddenly turned their attention right back to the unfolding drama. Andre noticed the audience and his face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. "Simone, please keep your voice down," he begged, stepping toward her and trying to grab her elbow. "People are staring at us. Let us just go outside and call a cab. We can talk about this at home." "Do not touch me!" Simone shrieked violently, slapping his hand away. The loud smack echoed sharply across the pristine showroom floor. "And do not talk to me about home. We do not have a home, Andre." The realtor called my cell phone while I was sitting in the back of a filthy economy cab. The $70,000 we wired for the penthouse deposit was recalled by the federal fraud department an hour ago. The building management canceled our contract and blacklisted us. We have absolutely nothing. Andre stumbled back, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process this new catastrophic loss. He looked around the room, realizing that every single person, including the general manager and the sales staff, was watching his entire life disintegrate. "It is a bank error," Andre insisted, tears of sheer panic finally spilling down his cheeks. "I will explain everything to the investigators. I will tell them Grandpa gave me verbal permission. You are going to tell them you forged a federal document," Simone fired back, making sure her voice was loud enough for every single witness in the building to hear. She turned slightly, addressing the room as much as she was addressing him. "Because I want everyone to know that I had absolutely nothing to do with this. I did not go into that study. I did not touch that antique violin. I did not sign those transfer papers. You did this all by yourself, Andre. You lied to me. You told me you got a massive executive promotion. You told me we were rich. I did it for us. Andre cried, his voice cracking into a pathetic whimper. I wanted to give you the life you deserve. I wanted to treat you like a queen. You treated me like an accomplice, Simone screamed, stepping right into his face. You are a broke, pathetic loser who has never accomplished a single thing in his entire life without his mother writing a check. I married a man I thought had potential, but you are just a parasite who steals from dying old men. Andre looked completely destroyed. The golden boy, who had spent his entire life being worshipped by our mother and shielded from every consequence, was standing in the middle of a luxury car dealership, being publicly, verbally eviscerated by his own wife. He had no defense. He had no clever comeback. He just stood there crying, sweating, and shaking. I am done. Simone declared, her voice suddenly dropping to a cold, absolute zero. I am not going to federal prison because you wanted to play pretend in a sports car. I am calling a divorce lawyer the absolute second I can find a Wi-Fi signal. I want my name completely separated from yours before the authorities freeze my personal checking account, too. Simone, wait, Andre begged, dropping to his knees right there on the polished tile floor. Please do not leave me. You are my wife. We took vows. Simone looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She did not say another word. She simply dropped the cheap plastic pharmacy bag directly onto his lap, turned on her heel, and marched toward the glass exit doors. She pushed through them and walked out into the busy downtown street, never once looking back. The silence that fell over the showroom after she left was suffocating. The wealthy customers began whispering to each other, shaking their heads at the pathetic display. The general manager sighed, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked back toward his private office, clearly deciding that Andre was no longer his problem. Andre remained on his knees for a long, agonizing moment. He slowly picked up the plastic bag, staring blankly at the floor. Then he slowly stood up. He looked around the massive, empty showroom, realizing that he was completely and utterly isolated. His car was gone. His penthouse was gone. His wife had just publicly abandoned him. His bank accounts were frozen. And he had exactly nowhere to go. Then he turned his head and saw me. I was standing near the leather upholstery samples, my hands resting calmly in the pockets of my tailored blazer. I had not moved an inch during the entire screaming match. I just watched him absorb the absolute ruin he had brought upon himself. When his eyes met mine, a flicker of desperate, pathetic hope flashed across his face. He wiped his nose on the sleeve of his expensive, ruined silk shirt and slowly shuffled toward me. He looked like a beaten dog looking for a scrap of mercy. Renee, he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. He stopped a few feet away from me, too afraid to step any closer. Renee, please. I know you hate me. I know I messed up. But I have no money. My phone is completely dead. I cannot even call an Uber. Just please give me a ride home. Just take me back to Mom's house so I can figure out what to do next. I looked at him, studying the sheer desperation in his eyes. For 35 years, he had treated me like I was completely invisible unless he needed something. He had stood by and smirked while our mother threatened to throw me out of my own apartment just hours ago. And now, after burning his entire life to the ground, he expected me to act as his personal chauffeur. I slowly pulled my car keys out of my pocket. The silver metal jingled softly in the quiet room. Andre let out a massive sigh of relief, his shoulders dropping as he thought I was actually going to save him one last time. I am not taking you anywhere, Andre, I said, my voice perfectly steady and loud enough to echo in the space between us. You made your bed, and now you get to lie in it. His face crumbled in horror. But how am he supposed to get home? He pleaded, gesturing wildly to the empty street outside. I did not have to answer him. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, the answer arrived. The bright afternoon light streaming through the massive glass windows was suddenly replaced by a violent flashing pattern. It was not the slow, rhythmic yellow of a commercial tow truck. It was the aggressive, rapid strobe of red and blue. Andre froze, his eyes widening in absolute terror. He slowly turned his head toward the front of the building. 3 heavy-duty city police cruisers aggressively pulled up onto the curb, stopping directly in front of the showroom doors. The tires screeched against the pavement. The doors of the lead cruiser flew open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out, accompanied by a plainclothes federal agent wearing a tactical vest. They did not look like they were there to ask polite questions. They looked directly through the glass, spotting Andre standing in the center of the room. The automatic glass doors of the luxury dealership slid open, and the federal agent walked through with a heavy, deliberate stride that commanded absolute authority. His tactical boots squeaked slightly against the polished Italian tile. The 2 uniformed city officers flanked him with their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts. The wealthy customers who had been eagerly watching the drama unfold just moments ago suddenly stepped back, giving the officers a very wide berth. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from a spectacle of public humiliation to a scene of serious criminal consequence. Nobody wanted to be standing too close when federal law enforcement moved in. Andre was completely paralyzed. He stood frozen in the center of the showroom, his expensive leather shoes rooted to the spot. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The smug, untouchable golden boy who had spent his entire life manipulating everyone around him was finally cornered. He had absolutely no idea how to survive a situation where his mother could not simply write a check or yell at a manager to make his problems disappear. Andre Williams, the federal agent, stated. His voice boomed across the quiet room, cutting through the tension like a knife. It was not a question. It was a confirmation. Andre swallowed hard, his throat bobbing nervously. "Yes," he whispered, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "But there is a massive mistake, sir. I am a victim here. My bank account was hacked. I just wanted to buy a car with my own money. My grandfather gave me that money. It is just a family misunderstanding." The federal agent did not even blink at the pathetic, transparent lie. He had clearly dealt with white-collar criminals before, and he had zero patience for their excuses. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent commanded, stepping directly into Andre's personal space. "You are under arrest for felony wire fraud, grand larceny, and the forgery of federal antiquities transfer documents." Andre let out a sharp, terrified gasp. He instinctively took a half-step backward, raising his hands as if he could somehow physically push the charges away. "Please, you do not understand," he pleaded, tears streaming freely down his face now. "I did not forge anything. I did not know it was a federal antiquity. I just wanted a reliable car for my wife. Please let me call my lawyer. Let me call my mother." "Turn around right now or you will be charged with resisting a federal arrest." The agent warned, his tone dropping to a dangerous, aggressive level. Andre finally broke. The fight completely drained out of him. He let out a loud, sobbing wail that echoed tragically off the high ceilings of the dealership. He slowly turned around and placed his trembling hands behind his back. The uniformed officers stepped forward, grabbing his wrists firmly. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking into place was the loudest sound in the room. It was the undeniable sound of my brother's entire life, coming to an abrupt, permanent halt. As the officers began reading him his Miranda rights, they spun him around and started marching him toward the front doors. The walk of shame across the showroom floor was absolute torture for him. He had to walk past the salespeople, the general manager, and the wealthy patrons, while restrained like a common criminal. His designer silk shirt was ruined by sweat and tears. His head hung low, his chin practically resting on his chest. They pushed through the glass doors, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun. I followed closely behind them, walking out onto the concrete pavement to watch the final act of this tragedy unfold. Just as the officers pressed Andre against the side of the police cruiser to conduct a physical search, a familiar silver SUV screeched recklessly into the dealership parking lot. It jumped the curb slightly and parked diagonally across 2 handicapped spaces right next to the VIP entrance. The driver's side door flew open violently, and my mother Brenda practically threw herself out of the vehicle. She must have received a frantic text message from Andre before his phone died, or perhaps Simone had called her on the way out. Either way, my mother was in a state of absolute unhinged panic. She sprinted across the parking lot completely out of breath, her eyes wild with terror. "No, stop!" My mother screamed, her voice tearing through the outdoor air. She lunged toward the squad car, her arms reaching out blindly. "That is my son. He made a mistake. It is just a misunderstanding. Unhand him right now." One of the uniformed officers immediately stepped away from Andre and held his hand up flat, blocking her path. "Mom, step back immediately," he ordered, his voice stern and commanding. "Do not interfere with a federal arrest, or you will be placed in handcuffs as well." My mother did not care. She tried to push past the officer, wildly grabbing at his uniform sleeve. "You cannot take him," she sobbed hysterically. "He is a good boy. He has a bright future. The violin belonged to his grandfather. It was family property. You have no right to arrest him for taking something that belongs to his own blood." The officer shoved her back forcefully, creating a solid barrier between her and the squad car. "I am warning you for the last time, Mum. Step back and remain on the sidewalk. If you touch me again, you are going to jail." The sheer physical force and the threat of arrest finally snapped my mother out of her violent delusion. She stumbled back, her chest heaving, as she realized that she could not bully, intimidate, or scream her way out of the situation. The police did not care who she was. They did not care about her colonial house or her perfectly manicured lawn. They only cared about the federal warrant they were currently executing. She watched helplessly as the agent opened the back door of the cruiser, placing his hand on top of Andre's head and shoving him down into the cramped back seat. The door slammed shut with a heavy final thud, locking Andre inside the metal cage. My mother dropped to her knees right there on the hard concrete pavement. She began weeping uncontrollably, the sound echoing off the glass walls of the dealership. She buried her face in her hands, completely broken. Then she slowly turned her head and saw me. I was standing perfectly still near the entrance columns, my hands resting calmly in the pockets of my tailored coat. I had watched the entire scene without showing a single ounce of emotion. My mother scrambled across the pavement on her hands and knees, ignoring the rough concrete scraping against her skin. She rushed over to me and grabbed the hem of my coat, holding onto the fabric as if I were a life raft in the middle of a hurricane. "Renee, please," she begged, looking up at me with sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. Her expensive makeup was ruined, running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "You are his sister. You are the only one who can fix this. Please call Grandpa Elijah. Tell them to stop. Tell the police you want to drop the charges. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding, and we will pay everything back. I will do whatever you want, Renee. I will sign the house over to you permanently. I will move out today. I will give you everything. Just please do not let them take my baby to prison." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the woman who had demanded I sacrifice my own credit score, my savings, and my peace of mind to protect a brother who never respected me. Just hours ago, she had stood in my apartment and gleefully handed me a fake eviction notice, trying to throw me out onto the street. And now she was kneeling at my feet, begging for my mercy. I felt absolutely nothing for her. No pity, no guilt, no obligation. I gently but firmly grabbed her wrists and pulled her hands off my coat. I took a deliberate step back, establishing a physical and emotional boundary that she would never cross again. I smoothed the front of my coat, looking down at her weeping form. "I did not press charges, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady and loud enough for her to hear over her own sobbing. "The federal government did, and they do not care about your tears." I turned around and walked to my car, leaving my mother weeping on the concrete pavement. The drive home was incredibly quiet and peaceful. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. For the first time in my life, the heavy, crushing burden of being the family shock absorber was entirely gone. The next 7 days were a blur of legal panic and absolute financial ruin for my family. Andre was released on bail, but the cost of his freedom was total devastation. Because his crime involved a registered international antiquity and crossing state lines, his bail was set at a staggering $250,000. He had no assets left to borrow against. His bank accounts were still completely frozen by the federal fraud investigation. To get him out of lockup, my mother was forced to drain every single cent of her retirement savings. She sold all of her expensive jewelry and liquidated her meager stock portfolio just to secure a high-risk bail bondsman. Once Andre was out, he had to hire a federal defense attorney. The retainer fee alone bankrupted whatever hidden cash reserves he had left. The lawyer took one look at the forged certificate of authenticity and the federal wire transfer logs and told my brother he was facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison. To make matters worse, the clock on their eviction notice continued to tick down without mercy. They had exactly 3 weeks to pack up their entire lives and vacate the properties I now legally owned. They were living in a state of constant, terrifying freefall. Then on a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was the head nurse from the VIP recovery wing at the city hospital. Grandpa Elijah had suffered a sudden and sharp decline during the night. His pneumonia had returned aggressively, and his lungs were failing rapidly. The doctors did not expect him to make it through the week. He had instructed the hospital staff to summon the entire family to his room for one final meeting. I grabbed my coat and drove straight to the medical center. The sterile smell of the hospital corridors felt heavier today. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door to room 412, the air inside was thick and suffocating. The rhythmic hissing of the oxygen machine was much louder now, working overtime to keep my grandfather breathing. He looked incredibly frail, lying against the crisp white hospital pillows. His skin was pale and his eyes were closed. Standing on the far side of the bed were my mother and my brother. Andre looked like a completely broken man. The expensive designer clothes, the flashy watch, and the arrogant swagger were entirely gone. He was wearing a faded gray sweatshirt and a cheap pair of jeans. He was trembling visibly, staring blankly at the linoleum floor. He had not showered in days, and the deep dark circles under his eyes made him look completely hollow. His wife had abandoned him, his freedom was gone, and his ego was shattered. My mother looked equally destroyed. She had aged 15 years in a single week. Her posture was completely defeated, but the moment she saw me walk into the room, a flash of pure, desperate venom crossed her face. She blamed me for everything. She did not dare yell at me in front of the hospital staff, however, so she quickly turned her attention back to the frail man lying in the bed. She saw an opportunity. She saw a dying man and decided to use his final moments on earth to execute one last desperate manipulation. "Dad," she whispered, creeping closer to the edge of the mattress. Her voice trembled with practiced theatrical sorrow. "Dad, please, you have to listen to me. You have to wake up and fix this." Grandpa Elijah did not move, but his breathing hitched slightly, indicating he could hear her. "Andre made a terrible mistake, Dad," my mother sobbed, reaching out to grasp the edge of the white blanket. She let the tears flow freely, performing for the audience of one. "But he is just a boy. He is your grandson. The federal prosecutors are threatening him with 10 years in prison. 10 years, Dad. His entire life will be completely over. He will never recover from this. You cannot let the government do this to your own blood. You have to save him." Andre let out a pathetic whimpering sound and sank heavily into one of the vinyl guest chairs, burying his face in his hands. He did not have the courage to even look at the grandfather he had stolen from. "All you have to do is sign a piece of paper," my mother pleaded, leaning heavily over the bed. "It is so simple, Dad. Thomas is your lawyer. He can draw it up right now. Just sign a retroactive permission slip. Tell the authorities you gave him the violin as an early inheritance gift and you just forgot because of your heavy medication. Tell them he had your blessing to sell it. They will drop the charges if the victim refuses to cooperate." I stood on the opposite side of the room, absolutely disgusted by her words. She was asking a dying man to commit federal perjury to cover up a felony. She was asking him to destroy his own pristine legacy and lie to the Global Antiquities Board just to save a thief from the consequences of his own actions. She had absolutely no shame left. "It is just a piece of wood, Dad." My mother cried, her voice growing more frantic as the silence stretched on. "Please, save your grandson. You are the only one who can stop this. If you love this family at all, you will sign the paper and let my boy go free." The heart monitor beeped with a slow, erratic rhythm. For a long, agonizing moment, the room was completely still. Then Grandpa Elijah slowly opened his dark eyes. The physical weakness of his failing body was undeniable, but the sheer force of his spirit remained absolutely unbroken. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at my mother. There was no pity in his eyes. There was no sympathy for her tears. There was only absolute crushing disgust. "You raised a thief, Brenda." He rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper, but carrying the heavy weight of absolute finality. "You raised an entitled, arrogant thief, and you enabled every single one of his catastrophic failures. And now you want me to lie to the federal government to protect him from his own greed." "I was just trying to protect my family." My mother wept, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. "Renee is your family." Grandpa shot back, his chest heaving with the immense effort of speaking. "And you sacrificed her over and over again for a boy who would not cross the street to save you. You let him steal from me. You tried to throw Renee out onto the street to cover his tracks. I am not signing anything. Andre will face the judge, and he will serve every single day of the sentence he earned." Andre let out a loud, wailing sob, rocking back and forth in his chair. He finally understood that there was no magical bailout coming. His grandfather was not going to save him, and his mother had run out of money to buy his way out. Grandpa Elijah turned his gaze away from my mother, dismissing her entirely. He looked toward the heavy wooden door of the hospital room. He raised a shaking hand and gave a small, deliberate nod. The door swung open smoothly. Thomas stepped into the room. The 65-year-old attorney was wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit, and his expression was completely unreadable. He looked at my mother and Andre with cold, professional detachment. In his right hand, he carried a thick, black leather briefcase. The final trap had arrived. The silence in the hospital room was so absolute that I could hear the faint ticking of Thomas' expensive wristwatch. My mother stared at me, her mouth hanging slightly open as the reality of her new existence crashed down upon her. She was no longer the matriarch holding the purse strings. She was a dependent, and I was her absolute authority. It took her a full minute to find her voice. When she finally spoke, it was not a plea for mercy. It was a visceral scream of pure outrage. "No!" she shrieked, lunging toward Thomas and trying to snatch the watermarked documents right out of his hands. "You are lying. You manipulated him. My father would never do this to me. I am his daughter. You cannot give my money to her. She is vindictive. She will let me starve on the street." Thomas easily sidestepped her frantic grab, holding the paperwork safely out of her reach. He did not even raise his voice. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked at her with clinical detachment. "Your father made this decision with absolute clarity," Brenda Thomas stated firmly. "You proved yourself entirely incapable of managing finances the moment you decided to defend a federal felony to protect your son. The trust is irrevocable. If you want your grocery stipend next month, you will need to enroll in the mandatory financial literacy courses I have outlined in this packet. And you will need to submit your receipts directly to Renee for approval." My mother turned toward me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You planned this." She spat, her hands balling into fists at her sides. "You stole my house. You stole my inheritance. You called the police on your own brother. You are a monster, Renee." I stood perfectly still, letting her venom wash over me without absorbing a single drop. "I did not plan any of this, Mom," I replied, my voice completely steady. "I just stopped shielding you from the consequences of your own actions." You handed me a fake eviction notice less than a week ago. You tried to throw me out of my home to make room for a thief. Now you get to learn how it feels to have someone else control your destiny. Andre, who had been sitting paralyzed in the vinyl guest chair, finally seemed to comprehend the magnitude of his own punishment. He looked up at Thomas, his eyes bloodshot and swollen. "What about me?" Andre asked, his voice trembling with pathetic desperation. "What about my share? Even if I go to prison, I will need money when I get out. I need a fresh start. Grandpa cannot just leave me with nothing." Thomas turned a cold, unforgiving stare toward my brother. "You attempted to defraud this estate, Andre. You forged your grandfather's signature on a federal antiquity transfer. The codicil is ironclad. By attempting to steal from the estate, you triggered the automatic disinheritance clause. You get absolutely nothing, not a single cent. Your name has been completely erased from the family trust. You are legally and financially severed from this family." Andre let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. He buried his face back into his hands, rocking back and forth in the chair. He had traded millions of dollars in future inheritance for a sports car he got to drive for exactly 3 hours. My mother could not accept it. She refused to accept that her reign of terror and entitlement was completely over. She lunged toward the hospital bed, grabbing the metal railing and screaming directly into my grandfather's face. "You cannot do this to us, Dad!" she wailed, her voice echoing violently off the sterile walls. "We are your blood. You have to change it back. Tell Thomas to rip up those papers right now. I will not let you leave me at the mercy of this ungrateful girl." Grandpa Elijah did not flinch. He reached out with a trembling hand and pressed the red call button attached to his bed rail. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy wooden door swung open, and 2 burly hospital security guards stepped into the room. They had clearly been briefed by Thomas beforehand, because they did not hesitate. "Escort them out," Thomas commanded, pointing a sharp finger at my mother and brother. "They are causing a severe medical disturbance, and they are no longer permitted on this floor." The guards moved quickly. One guard grabbed my mother by the arm, pulling her away from the bed railing. She fought him, kicking and screaming like a feral animal. "Get your hands off me," she shrieked. "I am his daughter. This is my family. You cannot make me leave." The second guard hauled Andre up from the chair by his sweatshirt. Andre did not fight back. He just let himself be dragged toward the door, his head hanging in total defeat. I watched them get pulled out into the hallway. My mother's screams echoed down the corridor, growing fainter and fainter as the guards forced them toward the elevators. The sound of her furious demands finally faded away entirely, leaving the hospital room in a state of profound quiet. Thomas neatly stacked the legal documents and placed them back into his black leather briefcase. He snapped the brass locks shut and gave me a curt, respectful nod. "The estate is secure, Renee," Thomas said quietly. "You have total control. I will be in my office if you need anything at all." "Thank you, Thomas," I said, my voice thick with genuine gratitude. He turned and walked out of the room, closing the heavy door softly behind him. I was finally completely alone with Grandpa Elijah. The adrenaline of the confrontation slowly drained from my body, leaving me feeling incredibly tired, but deeply at peace. I walked over to the side of the hospital bed and gently took my grandfather's hand. His skin was cool to the touch, and his breathing was becoming much more shallow. The immense effort of facing my mother and cementing his legacy had drained the last of his strength. "You did it, Grandpa," I whispered, squeezing his fingers. "It is over. They cannot hurt anyone anymore." He slowly opened his eyes. The fierce, commanding fire that had burned in them just moments ago was beginning to fade, replaced by a soft, quiet clarity. He looked at me with immense pride. "You are going to be just fine, baby girl." He breathed out, his voice barely a whisper now. "You are strong. You always were." He let out a long, rattling breath. His grip on my hand loosened slightly. Then he slowly lifted his other arm. His hand was shaking violently, but his intention was entirely deliberate. He pointed a long, trembling finger toward the very bottom of his hospital bed, down near his feet. "Look under the bed," he whispered, his chest barely rising. "Look under the bed, Renee." I knelt down on the cold hospital linoleum, resting my knees against the smooth floor. I reached under the heavy metal frame of the bed, right where his trembling finger had pointed. My hand brushed against something thick and textured. It was a heavy, dark canvas duffel bag pushed far back against the wall where no one would casually notice it. I grabbed the sturdy nylon strap and pulled it out into the light. The bag was surprisingly heavy. I lifted it onto the edge of the mattress right next to my grandfather's resting legs. I looked up at him. His eyes were open, watching me with a profound sense of peace. I reached for the thick metal zipper and slowly pulled it open. Inside the canvas bag was a custom-molded carbon fiber instrument case. My heart began to pound in my chest. I unlatched the heavy steel clasps and opened the lid. The rich scent of aged spruce wood and vintage varnish floated up into the sterile hospital air. Resting perfectly intact against the crushed red velvet lining was the 1920 Italian violin. I let out a breath I did not even know I was holding. The varnish gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, completely unharmed. My grandfather had not just set a trap to catch my brother in his web of lies. He had orchestrated a flawless sting operation to ensure the safety of our family's most valuable heirloom. Thomas and the undercover antiquities broker had secured the violin and physically brought it back to the hospital before the federal agents had even placed the handcuffs on Andres' wrists at the luxury car dealership. I reached out and gently traced the graceful curve of the wooden neck. It was an absolute masterpiece of craftsmanship, a testament to a man who understood the true value of history and patience. I looked back at Grandpa Elijah. Tears finally welled up in my eyes, not out of sorrow, but out of sheer overwhelming gratitude. He had spent his final days on Earth protecting me from the toxic chaos of my own mother and brother. He had used his vast resources and brilliant mind to legally dismantle the people who had tried to break me, ensuring that I would walk away completely unscathed. Grandpa Elijah slowly reached his hand out. His fingers were cold and frail, but his touch was incredibly steady. He placed his palm against my cheek, gently wiping away a single tear that had escaped my eye. "It was always yours, baby girl," he whispered, his voice incredibly faint. "They tried to take it from you, but they could not. You are the only one who truly understands its worth. Now go out there and play them your tune." He offered me one final reassuring smile. His hand slipped from my cheek, coming to rest peacefully on his chest. He closed his dark eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. The erratic rhythm of the heart monitor steadily slowed down until it flattened into a single continuous tone. Grandpa Elijah passed away quietly with absolute dignity, leaving this world exactly the way he lived in it, completely on his own terms. I did not call for the nurses right away. I stood by his bedside for a long time, holding his hand and simply existing in the quiet, peaceful space he had left behind. When I finally pressed the call button, I zipped up the canvas duffel bag, slung the heavy strap over my shoulder, and walked out of the hospital room holding my head high. A week later, the city experienced a cool, crisp autumn morning, perfectly suited for a farewell. I stood at the entrance of the most prestigious historic cemetery in the city, greeting the mourners as they arrived. I had organized and funded the entire funeral myself. It was an elegant, deeply dignified affair that truly reflected the quiet wealth and profound cultural legacy of the man we were burying. A live jazz quartet played soft, soulful melodies near the sprawling oak tree where the mahogany casket rested. The contrast between the beauty of the ceremony and the pathetic state of my surviving family members was staggering. Andre stood completely alone in the very back row of the folding chairs. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been pulled straight from a discount rack. His designer wardrobe had undoubtedly been pawned to help cover his astronomical legal fees. He looked terrified, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if he expected federal agents to leap out from behind the headstones. He was currently out on bail, but his trial date was looming, and the reality of a 10-year federal prison sentence hung over his head like a dark, heavy cloud. Simone was nowhere to be seen. She had finalized the preliminary steps of her divorce at record speed and had publicly severed all ties with the disgraced Williams family. She had entirely erased Andre from her life, completely abandoning him to face the federal prosecutors on his own. My mother Brenda sat in the front row, but she looked absolutely nothing like the terrifying matriarch who used to rule our household with an iron fist. Stripped of her financial power and her luxurious home, she sat quietly with her head bowed, staring blankly at her trembling hands. She had officially moved out of my property 2 days prior, renting a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She knew that her survival now depended entirely on my approval of her monthly grocery stipend. Her reign of terror had been completely permanently dismantled. When the time came, I walked up to the polished wooden podium to deliver the eulogy. I looked out over the crowd of musicians, business partners, and family friends. I spoke clearly and confidently, honoring my grandfather's brilliant mind, his hidden empire, and his unwavering commitment to justice. I did not mention my mother or my brother. I did not need to. By standing at that podium, orchestrating the entire event with absolute poise, I firmly established my role as the new head of the estate. After the final prayers were said, and the casket was gently lowered into the earth, the crowd began to disperse toward the reception tents. I stood by the graveside, taking a moment of quiet reflection. I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path behind me. I turned around to see my mother and brother standing a few feet away, looking like completely defeated strangers. Renee, my mother began, her voice shaking with a pathetic, desperate hope. The funeral was beautiful. Your grandfather would have loved it. I know things have been difficult, but Andre has a meeting with his public defender tomorrow. We really need an advance on next month's stipend to pay for his transportation. Just a small advance, Renee. We are family. I looked at her and then at Andre, who could not even make eye contact with me. The sheer audacity to ask me for money over the fresh grave of the man they had stolen from was breathtaking. I adjusted the lapel of my black tailored coat. I am not your bank mom, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Your trust is managed strictly by the rules Thomas set forth. You get $1,500 on the first of the month. If you mismanage your funds, that is your problem. Do not ask me for an advance. Do not ask me to pay for Andre's lawyer. And do not ever approach me at a family event expecting a handout again. But Renee, my mother gasped, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. How are we supposed to survive? I suggest you start making better choices, I replied. From now on, all of your financial requests go directly through Thomas. If you call my personal cell phone, I will block the number. I turned my back on them and walked away, leaving them standing completely alone in the sprawling cemetery. I cut all financial and emotional ties right then and there, severing the toxic anchor that had dragged me down for 35 years. I walked toward my car, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling entirely free. 6 months later, the harsh winter had melted away, giving way to a bright, vibrant spring. The city was bustling with new energy, and my life had completely transformed. The transition into spring perfectly mirrored the massive shift in my reality. I was no longer the stressed, exhausted woman rushing across town to put out fires that my family had intentionally started. I was finally the architect of my own life. Tonight was the ultimate culmination of that hard-earned freedom. I stood near the grand entrance of an exclusive upscale gallery in the heart of Manhattan. The space was absolutely breathtaking, featuring high vaulted ceilings, polished marble floors, and massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline. I was hosting my first annual Therapeutic Music and Classical String Appraisal Gala. The room was packed with elite collectors, renowned musicians, and high-net-worth investors. Waiters in crisp black suits wove gracefully through the elegant crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. I caught my reflection in one of the tall mirrored pillars, and for a moment I simply stopped to look at myself. I was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald green gown that draped perfectly across my shoulders. My hair was styled in an elegant updo, and I wore a simple diamond necklace that caught the ambient light of the crystal chandeliers overhead. I did not just look successful. I looked radiant. I looked powerful. Most importantly, I looked completely and utterly at peace. The chaotic, desperate energy of my past felt like it belonged to an entirely different lifetime. Through the regular updates Thomas provided, I knew exactly where the pieces of my former family had landed. Andre had faced the federal judge 2 months ago. Because of the undeniable paper trail, the fraudulent bank transfers, and the forged certificate of authenticity, his public defender could do absolutely nothing for him. He was sentenced to 7 years in a federal correctional facility. He was currently wearing a standard-issue uniform and adhering to a strict schedule entirely removed from any luxury sports cars or expensive penthouses. My mother, Brenda, was living the exact life she had earned. She was residing in a small, modest apartment on the outskirts of the city, entirely dependent on the strict monthly budget I approved. Every single month, she submitted her grocery receipts to Thomas, who forwarded them to me for final sign-off. She was taking her mandatory financial literacy classes, sitting in a sterile classroom learning how to balance a checkbook at 60 years old. She had tried to reach out a few times, sending long apologetic emails begging for a relationship, but I simply deleted them without replying. I had forgiven her for my own peace of mind, but forgiveness does not require reconciliation. The boundaries I set were absolute and permanent. A soft chime echoed through the gallery, signaling that it was time for the main event. The low murmur of wealthy patrons slowly quieted down as they gathered around the center stage. I took a deep, calming breath, smoothed the heavy silk fabric of my emerald gown, and walked toward the microphone. The overhead spotlight shifted, bathing me in a warm, golden glow. "Welcome, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly and confidently across the silent room. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the intersection of history, art, and healing. We have spent the evening admiring the craftsmanship of centuries past. But instruments were never meant to simply be looked at behind glass cases. They were built to be heard. They were built to tell a story." I stepped back from the microphone and turned toward the velvet-draped display table behind me. I reached out and carefully unclasped the custom carbon fiber case. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the front row of the audience as I lifted the instrument into the light. "This is a 1920 Italian masterwork," I explained, turning back to face the crowd. "It is the absolute crown jewel of my personal collection. It was fiercely protected by my grandfather, and tonight I am incredibly honored to share its voice with all of you." I tucked the smooth, polished wood beneath my chin, feeling the familiar, comforting weight of it resting against my collarbone. I raised the bow. The gallery was so quiet, I could hear the faint rustle of silk dresses and the sharp intake of breath from the collectors in the front row. I closed my eyes, visualizing my grandfather Elijah sitting in his leather armchair in his study, smiling that proud, quiet smile. Then I brought the bow down across the strings. The first note was incredibly rich and resonant, vibrating through the ancient wood and straight into my chest. I did not play a simple, polite classical sonata. I played a complex, technically demanding piece that echoed the exact emotional trajectory of my journey over the last year. The music started slow and deep, carrying the heavy, melancholic weight of being undervalued and unseen. It was the sound of a daughter trying to earn love that was never going to be freely given. But as my fingers danced faster across the fingerboard, the tempo shifted. The melody grew sharper, more urgent, and fiercely determined. The bow sliced across the strings with absolute precision, building a wall of rapid-fire notes. It was the sound of boundaries being drawn. It was the sound of a master deed sliding across a marble kitchen island. It was the sound of steel handcuffs locking into place and the heavy thud of a hospital door closing permanently on a toxic past. The music swelled, filling every single corner of the massive Manhattan gallery. I poured every ounce of my resilience, my grief, and my ultimate triumph into the instrument. I felt a profound sense of physical and emotional release with every stroke of the bow. I was not playing for my mother's approval. I was not playing to save my brother. I was playing entirely for myself. As I reached the climax of the piece, the fierce, chaotic tempo suddenly broke apart, dissolving into a soaring, triumphant, and impossibly beautiful final melody. It was the sound of absolute, unshakable freedom. I drew the bow across the strings for one last sustained note, letting it ring out into the air until it naturally and gracefully faded into perfect silence. I lowered the violin and opened my eyes. For 3 full seconds, the gallery was completely silent. The audience was entirely captivated, stunned by the raw emotional power of the performance. Then a prominent investor in the front row began to clap. Within a split second, the entire room erupted. It was a deafening, thunderous roar of applause. Men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer gowns were standing up, cheering and shouting their praise. The standing ovation washed over me like a warm wave of pure validation. I smiled, looking out at the sea of faces, but my mind was incredibly quiet and clear. As I stood there center stage, holding the instrument that was meant to be my downfall, but became my ultimate victory, I realized something profound. I looked directly out into the crowd, speaking internally to anyone who has ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to protect them. True power does not come from screaming matches in a driveway. It does not come from trying to convince toxic family members to suddenly see your worth or respect your boundaries. True power comes from stepping entirely off their battlefield. It comes from outsmarting them quietly, legally dismantling their entitlement, and completely removing their access to your energy. You do not need to argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You just need to walk away, build your empire, and play your own beautiful tune. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic to protect your own peace? How did you handle the fallout when you finally established your boundaries? I would love to read your experiences in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you believe in the power of standing your ground and creating your own success. Share this with anyone who might need a reminder that they are not obligated to set themselves on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Remember, your life belongs to you. Make it a masterpiece.